Thanks very much. Good evening. Thanks, Mark. First of all, I would like to thank the ICD for giving me the opportunity to make, I promise, this short presentation. And the topic, as Mark says, will be that in order to invigorate our European Union's dream, we need also to invigorate and to strengthen our democracies within the European Union. But let's start from the beginning. And the beginning is this famous painting made by Rubens called The Rape of Europa. As you know, Zeus, at that time, the god of gods in the Greek ancient age, fell in love with a woman called Europa. So he decided to try to seduce her. And he transformed himself into a tame white bull and decided to mix in with her father's herds. And while Europa was with her helpers gathering some flowers, she eventually saw the bull and decided to go onto his back. So Zeus decided to take that opportunity and run and swim until they get to the island of Crete. There, in the island of Crete, Zeus decided to reveal his true identity, and Europa decided to stay in Crete and become the first queen of Crete. Well, for Europeans, I will take this license to say that is one important step in our common identity. It's the first time that the name of Europa is used. It is the first time that someone speaks about Europa. So we can say that everything starts from there. Our common history, our common identity, I would say also our common name. But coming from those days till today, I think that we all agree that we are not living good times in Europe. Brexit, resignation of Renzi 2 weeks ago, the rise of far left and right political parties that they have a common project, which is to nationalize many of the policies nowadays on the hands of the European Union institutions, are very alarming signals of a path of deconstruction, disintegration of our European Union project. And perhaps if we ask ourselves why is happening this, we will all agree that, for instance, the failure of the European Union institutions in order to face the financial crisis, or the failure of the European Union institutions to create jobs for long-term unemployees or young unemployees are significant reasons of this decline of the European Union project. Of course, and we heard many opinions during this day, of course, the failure of the European Union institutions to face united a global challenge such as the refugee crisis also explain why the European Union is now declining. But what I would like to defend in this short presentation is that also the decline of the European Union project is linked to the crisis of legitimacy of our democracies. And what I mean by the crisis of legitimacy, if we take the definition made by Professor Manuel Castel, who is a professor in the Southern California University, he says that this crisis of legitimacy is the rejection by human on the results of the process of delegation of the decision-making in the hands of the representatives and their institutions of governance. And we have many facts that shows this decline, this distrust, this rejection. If we take, for instance, the figures and the trends from the people and their opinion towards the European Union institutions, we see that during these last years, the gap between those that absolutely distrust the European Union institutions and the European Union democracy is bigger than the one that tend to trust the European Union. If we go institution by institution, such as, for instance, the European Council, we see much more people that tend not to trust the European Union Council than the one that tend to trust the European Union Council. If we go to the European Union Commission, which is the common government that we have at the European level, we see the same trend. And if we go to the European Parliament, which is the most democratic institution within the European Union institutions, we also see a completely distrust, rejection from the people to their European Parliament. If we go to the national parliaments and national governments, the gap is even higher. And if we go to the political parties, it doesn't matter if it's before or after the crisis that began the year 2008, people reject absolutely political parties. Over 80% of the people asked in the European Union distrust and reject the political parties. So it's true that we are living in a paradoxical time because even though there are many, many countries throughout the world that are embracing democracies, in established democracies, democracy is in crisis. So I would like to remember this person, former president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, who used to say that the problem is not democracy, the problem is how democracy is functioning. He says that democracy as a human construction is always an unfinished building. It's more or less like Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, made by Gaudí. No, democracy is always adapting, it's always evolving, it's always under construction. So perhaps, to be more specific, the problem is not democracy. The problem is how democracy is working. And we have many examples of what I'm saying. In our day-to-day life, we have many comrades, colleagues, families that they don't feel represented by their politicians and by their national parliaments and governments. People see corruption everywhere. People see impunity everywhere. People feel that politicians and political parties work for themselves and not for the people. And in the end, what is happening in the European Union is this picture. The rise of nationalism, the rise of populism, the rise of anti-European Union's projects. So what would be the, let's say, the sources of this crisis of democracy? In my view, I truly believe that, for instance, one of the main reasons of this crisis of democracy is the non-separation of powers. As politician that I used to be, what I see is that the executive power and the legislative power is always linked to the life of political parties. There's also a huge professionalization of politics. So this trend of professionalizations ends up with dynasties. The Bush dynasties, the Clinton dynasty, the Kirchner dynasty in Argentina. Hope that we don't have a Trump dynasty in the future. With one is enough. And also, I think that politics nowadays is seen by the people like media politics, especially linked with the scandals. There's also institutions of society that are distrusted. And as I said before, most of the people see corruption everywhere, and especially what they see is impunity. And some idea that it was mentioned with some colleagues during previous conference and previous presentation, there's of course a huge gap between the global challenges that we are facing societies and the instruments that the government have or has in order to tackle these global challenges. There are, of course, national instruments. So What would be, in my view, the solutions in order to invigorate our democracies? More democracy. If we consider that democracy is a procedure of deliberation, a procedure of decision-making where you try to engage more people, as many people as you can, what we should do, what we must do, is to correct the deviations of our representative democracy. In my view, I believe that the cornerstone of our democracy is always and must be always representative democracy. And for that, we have to act at two levels, at the European level, but also at the state level. At the state level, we need to reform our electoral laws. It's true that these electoral laws are drawn and passed by dominant political actors that are frightened to lose their power. But it's also true that we need to increase the proportionality of our electoral laws, to make real the idea of one person, one vote. We need also to fight against corruption, guaranteeing public financing of parties, accountability, radical transparency with declaration of assets of our representatives in the parliament and in the government. We need also to limiting the terms of elected officials. We need to democratizing our parties with primaries, within an increased presence of diversity, and also guaranteeing the equal or gender equality within the parties. We need also to make real the radical separation of the judiciary power from the executive power, which is something that in many countries within the European Union is not happening anyway. And at the European level, I think that we need to reinforce federal institutions. We need to make real that the European Commission is a federal government. We need to reinforce its independency vis-à-vis national governments. We need to reinforce and to strengthen the accountability of the European Commission before the European Parliament. And we need also to have a gender parity government at the European Union Commission that we don't have nowadays. And of course, we need to open and give the floor to new ways of democracies that can help as complementary sources of legitimacy to the representative democracy. I'm speaking about participatory democracy, which is functioning very well at local level, as you may know for sure, but also electronic democracy. I'll give you some figures. The advent of the digital age in a world in which 97% of information is digitalized, and 3 billion people are users of internet social networking platforms, and there are 7 billion of numbers of mobile phones, has prompted a number of projects of so-called electronic democracy that aimed at reshaping the connection between government and also citizens and citizens themselves by using digital interaction on a diversity of issues and procedures. And one significant experience that happens in Europe was the Icelandic constitution, elaborated and voted by citizens themselves over the internet during the year 2011 and 2012. And this is something that definitely we need to use also at national level and also at the European level. So to conclude, because I promised that I was going to be short in my presentation, and I just wanted to give you 4 conclusions. The first one would be that in order to invigorate our EU's dream, we need to have this conscience that the crisis of Europe is also the crisis of representative democracy. Second, that the problem is not the ideal of democracy, but how democracy is working. So if we adapt our democracies and its procedures to what people expect, we will strengthen the European Union's dream. Third, how? Reforming representative democracy at state level and also at European level, and opening to complementary new ways of democracy, especially electronic democracy. And fourth, crisis of democracy will be solved with more democracy, which I call it democratizing democracy. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanchez. We'd be happy to take a few questions or comments from anyone who would like. And as always, if you could just raise your hand and then briefly introduce yourself when posing the question. Okay, we'll start here. Okay.
Short question. What do you think? Could you nationalize a democracy?
What do you mean by nationalized democracy?
Well, I think there is a fight in Europe. There is a democracy ruled by the principles of European Union itself. But I see there is a fight with the local democracy, national states. Look what happened at that, by example, Brexit, in the sense, there is a problem there. The same we have seen in Austria, you know. One could not say that British people are not democrats, they are not respecting democracy, you know. And they started to think that there is a disagreement between their democracy in their own country and the democracy in the European Union. This process, symbolically, I consider as a nationalizing of a democracy. Yeah.
Well, nowadays, after the results of the Brexit referendum and also the results of the referendum in Italy, there are many people that are questioning why we use this participatory democracy that in the end what creates is instability, or for instance the Brexit in the European Union. But I think that the problem is not the referendum. The problem is the use that politicians made from the instrument of a referendum. If you try, as this is my opinion, try to create a British problem that was in the beginning a problem of the Conservative Party within the Conservative Party, and you try to export that problem to the British people, and in the end, after the referendum, becomes a global problem, the Brexit. The problem is not the referendum, the problem is the use that Cameron, the former Prime Minister Cameron, did about the referendum, asking people the wrong question. It's the same than in Italy. You can make a referendum of a constitutional reform, but if you linked your future to the result of that constitutional reform or that votation, you are converting that referendum in another issue, which is a referendum of the government action of Matteo Renzi as Prime Minister of Italy. So I don't think that we have to blame referendums. What we need to do is to pose the correct questions, to have the correct answers within our citizens. But in the end, what we can face this challenging moment from the people that they want to be engaged and participate in the decision-making process, we can close the doors or we can open the doors and try to engage more people and make more legitimate our democracies. And I prefer to open the doors. Because in the end, if we don't do it, populism and nationalism will win the battle.
Pedro, you've inspired many questions, but if they agree to be short, let's take 2 ladies and 2 gentlemen. But then I think we have to limit it to that, if it's okay. But I'd ask everyone to be concise so we can get as many in as we can. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your excellent speech. I am from Morocco, and I think that the crisis of democracy, of representative democracy, is not only in Europe, but also in our country. People want no more to participate at election because they said it changed nothing. We don't want always the same. And my question is about, you have spoken about the issue of professionalization of election, of elected people. Mm-hmm. And don't you think that really the chance to have other things with democracy is to have the big place for young people and women You have spoken about women, but I think that parity is really a door that can open a lot of possibilities of change of our politics, and also young people. And I wonder if it wouldn't be a good thing to have only each person that is elected only for one time and stop, so that we can have a change of people that are representative, because the feeling of the citizen is that it is always the same people that came at this position. It's not always true, but it is the perception of people. Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. I agree with some of the ideas that you said. The debate of one term is real. Many people think that perhaps one term is enough. I disagree. I think that 2 terms will be much clever, in order that in the end, in 4 years' time, I mean, you can get some practice, get used to the responsibilities that you have. But in the end, 2 terms, I think, is enough. No, that's the thing that I propose when I was trying to become prime minister in Spain, to have 2 terms, 8 years of prime minister, which I think it's enough. No, and as Secretary General, I can tell you that with me as Secretary General of the Socialist Party, we were the first party with more women in the list, but in the upper position, not in the lower position. No, that it happens sometimes, you know, when you compare yourself with other political parties. No, and I think at least in Spain, one of the issues will be also to include and make visible the diversity of our societies. Not only the gender equality, but also gays, immigrants, to be also involved and visible in the candidacy and in political life.
Thank you. I'm Tulu from South Africa. Like my colleague, I fully agree with what you've said, and am excited. I was wondering, what does democratizing democracy mean? I often talk about reimagining democracy because I also do think that democracy is in crisis, just principally because of how we execute it, because people then reject the idea of democracy, but I agree with you that there is no particular way that we should use to execute democracy. We have to just keep rethinking how we could do it. All of it being about the government of the people, by the people. But where I would like to ask you is, what can we read? We're just in the process of launching in South Africa a foundation on leadership for democracy and peace. And my target group is young people, because as the former minister is saying, they opt out of the system. The best thing is to work together to rethink the system and change the system whilst participating in. So I'm asking, what can we read and how can we reach you to discuss more? I understand, though, that our colleague Mark Donfried is going to be bringing you into the center to talk. I also am asking about the UN. If there's a crisis in democracy in our countries and in the EU, don't you think also they are using old skins to take care of new wines, and global governance is in crisis too? Thank you.
Well, absolutely. You posed two very interesting questions. The first one regarding youth. I mean, I was Secretary General of a very traditional party, the oldest party in our political system in Spain, 137 years old. And it was the first time that we had primaries in order to elect the Secretary General, the leader party. So that was an excellent, let's say, decision. But I think young people, they distrust absolutely political parties. So one way to attract young people is by using political platforms that in the end transform themselves into political organization, which is something that happens in Spain. The youngest parties, they like to call themselves political platforms instead of political parties. We know that in the end, if you want to succeed in politics, you need to have a political organization. But sometimes it's a game of words. But having not a very structured movement like the one that they can find in a political party could be one of the ideas. No. What I mean by democratizing democracy and how I link it to the European Union project is that if we don't solve at national level our crisis of legitimacy, in the end, what is going to happen is that populism and nationalism will win election after elections. And even if they reach the ceiling, for instance, in the past Austrian elections with 47% of the social support, they will influence politics at national level. So that is why we need to strengthen democracy at European level, but also at national level. If we don't solve the crisis at national level, the problem of the integration of the European Union is gonna be a huge problem in the midterm. Thank you very much.
Two more questions.
Okay.
Two gentlemen.
Okay.
Dr. Buse?
Mr. Secretary General, three straight questions.
Okay.
Rightly, you mentioned the electoral law existing. Why is it not possible, I think, to establish an election law for Europe? I have always to vote for my national party. I think it would be better to have European parties.
Absolutely.
I think, why are you not doing it on behalf of the Social Democrats?
I demand
It's a straight question. Yeah, you demand it. Everybody is always everything demanding, but there are no results. I think.
I'm sorry, I was the leader of the opposition. I wasn't in government.
No. You can do it by the cooperation of the European Social Democrats.
I know.
I think it is not the responsibility of the Partito Popular in Spain to do such an activity. It's the responsibility of you.
Well, Juncker was the candidate of the Popular Party in the last European elections, but he didn't run in any list. Schulz did.
You know, it was not a fair regulation because it was not even a candidate.
That's your opinion.
I
not
think,
mine.
I think for sure it's true. There's no legal regulation in this direction and to allow to build up European parties. Maybe I want to vote for a Social Democrat of Spain in Austria. That must be possible. I think the second question is we have some countries where democracy is in doubt, Hungary, Poland, and so on. Are you doing something in relation to the Social Democrats there to improve their situation? I think what is happening in this direction, there is a common European responsibility. Mm-hmm. And the third question is, I think it is a tradition now in European democracy that every politician appearing, speaking about democracy in Europe is critical and saying everything is so bad. I think it would be beautiful if somebody standing up and saying, it's so good. For example, 70 years of peace. I think here the attitude should be a little bit more changed.
No, I completely agree with your last sentence, sorry. I think that democracy in Europe is working very well. But I think that we can agree, you and I and all the people in the audience, that it could work better. That's the only thing that I was pointing and highlighting in my presentation, that democracy it can work better at European level and at state level. And the thing is that if we don't solve these problems at national level, Le Pen is going to win in France. Perhaps in Austria, the far right party will win next elections. And in the end, what will happen with the integration of the European Union? Having in the government people that don't trust the European Union project. This is the question that I'm just presenting in this short presentation. And in the end, of course, I agree with you that we need to strengthen political rights at the European level. We need to have transnational candidates and common list. For instance, for the European Union Commission. I mean, why the President of the European Union Commission is not the same head, and the candidates within the 28 countries in the next elections at the European level. I think that those are the things that in the end, at least, I was defending within the Socialist Party at the European level. And I can tell you, many of my comrades, leaders of the Socialists, were defending the same. Well, we have one common candidate, which was... No. The only thing, yeah, I agree with you, that I hope that in the next elections, citizens from all over Europe can vote for his or her presidency of the European Commission.
Final question here in the back, if we can, please.
Good evening. My name is Albert Gregory. I'm coming from Austria, like Erhard Busek. Firstly, thank you for your speech. You are a friend of Europe, like I like to do, and thank you very much. 3 short questions or problems. You spoke about the new techniques of digitalization in politics. Is that meaning as more direct democracy? I'm not a friend of too much direct democracy, and I think the vote in Great Britain, Brexit, shows very well the difference between a vote of the people and the representatives, the members of parliament. And maybe the only hope is that when Great Britain is not longer a member of the European Union, the original process to make Europe really a union is be easier without Great Britain. I'm a friend of the English, but I see that chance, first. The second is, I remember very well, in the 70s, I lived there for some years before entering the monastery in Germany. Your friend, saint in your tradition, Willy Brandt, came to the government in Germany and he said, let's try more democracy, to democratize, as you have in your title, more parts of the life, of daily life and in the society. And then came a German professor, maybe of the other tradition, Helmut Schelsky, and he said, and I think there's something good, democracy is a limited system combined with balance of power, separation of the different corporate parliament, administration and justice, and please be careful to make democracy totalitarian. That's the problem of to expand the system of democracy in too much room. The last point is I'm so old that I remember politicians of different parties after the Second World War. They had ideas, they had programs, maybe they had ideologies. We are against that. We fought in the 50s, 60s against the ideologies. But what we at the moment have is, excuse me, that all the politicians are working without program and visions. They are only looking for the next poll. They are doing only things what are useful for the next election. And that is a short circuit because nobody knows what happens after the election. The loser has to be decapitated. The winner has no idea what to do because it was only the running about the public opinion about that. And I think there is one problem in democracy principally in our medial time. I don't know how to solve it, but I think it's good to know what is the problem that the people lose the confidential, the trust in the representatives.
Well, I agree with what you said. I think it was Churchill that says that great politicians, they work for the next generations instead of working for the next elections, which is, of course, always challenging for for politicians. No, perhaps I didn't explain myself correctly, but what I was trying to say with electronic democracy is not using the referendum on a daily basis. And that is why I put the example of the Icelandic constitution, where the people participate in the elaboration and also voting in favor of their constitution. So I think that you can combine electronic democracy with representative democracy. For instance, when you are passing some laws at your national parliament or at European Parliament, you can open the door for the participation through social media for people that perhaps are interested. And this is something that it will create more energy of legitimization of these laws that you are passing at the European Parliament or our national parliament. I was thinking when I spoke about electronic democracy as a complement of representative democracy, which I said in the beginning of my speech that it was the cornerstone of our democratic system. So yes, and in the end, of course, you remember the words of Billy Brandt, no? But I think that if people feel that politicians and political parties, they don't represent themselves or themselves, and they are representing and working for themselves, so to say, for the politicians or for political parties, perhaps it's because we are doing something bad, or we're not doing something in a correct manner. And this is something that we have to question ourselves and try to do it better. That is why I remember the words of Havel, the former Czech Republic president, when he says that in the end, democracy as a human construction is always an unfinished building. And the problem is not democracy, the problem is how democracy is working. And I think that without criticizing democracy, because I defend democracy as a progressive person, a progressive politician, I think that we can do much better functioning democracy and adapting democracy for what the people needs and expects from democracy in the 21st century. And in the end, it's a problem of evolution. In the end, it's a problem not about the answers, it's about political will. And this is, well, the last remark that I wanted to say. But many thanks
Pedro,
for your reflection.
If I may, Pedro, a final request from one of my colleagues who would like to ask at least a one short question, and then we'll conclude.
Thank you, Mark. So, Mr. Perez, thank you for your presentation. As you told in your presentation, you think that it's better to give more power to the states. My question is so short, like, what do you think, for example, if Spain became like a federal state, like, for example, in Germany, this situation, will be like increase the democracy or not? What do you think about this? Like,
I'm a federalist. I think that the problem of the territorial cohesion in Spain, as our Austrian colleague said in his speech some hours before, I think that to solve the problem of Catalonia and the Basque Country in Spain, so in the end to strengthen the territorial cohesion of Spain, the only way is to federalize our country. So we have to, in the end, make a constitutional reform in order to have a federal government in Spain, recognizing singularities and nationalities that nowadays are not recognized as they want to be in our constitution. It was an extraordinary constitution during these last 40 years of our democracy in Spain, but I think that, as I said, for democracy is a problem or an issue of evolution. We need to change our constitution, to adapt our constitutions to the society of the 21st century. And this is something that we must do, the new generations. The old generations can help us, advising us, but I think this is something that we must do, new generations in Spain. Many thanks.
The Honorable Pedro Sánchez, thank you again so much.